This is the Redneck Reject. Going to be making a little bit different video today. It's actually going to be covering some stuff from the Bible, the King James Version to be specific. Those of y'all out there not interested, you go ahead and click off the video now, and that's fine. But moving on, it's going to be covering Acts chapter 15, verse 21, and how it relates to the rest of Acts chapter 15. I believe this has been overlooked by the modern church. The significance of this has been downplayed or outright ignored in context with the rest of Acts chapter 15. So what I'm going to do is take a look at it. Y'all tell me what y'all think it means. But we'll take a look at it here, and we'll read the verse. So Acts chapter 15, verse 21. For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. Now that comes after the four things that were told to the Gentiles that they must give up. And in the modern interpretation of Acts chapter 15, this is about what the Gentiles were required to do, whether they were required to follow the law of God as given to Moses, or whether they were freed from such law after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, whom I call Yeshua. But anyway, we'll back up from 21 and we'll read James and the council at Jerusalem had just handed down their verdict on the matter. My contention would be what the verdict actually is versus what it seems to be according to modern doctrine. So, okay, verse 19, I believe this is James speaking. Wherefore my sentence is that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to God. Verse 20, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. Basically, these four things all have to do with idol worship. In my view, these things are all idol worship. Idol temple worship from the ancient times, the context of the culture they were living in. Okay, you abstain from pollutions of idols. Obviously, if you're going to worship the God of the Hebrews, you are not going to worship other gods at the same time. And from fornication, which would be temple prostitution, where there were prostitutes in the pagan temples, and from things strangled, and from blood, also temple sacrifices and the rites involved with that. Those are all four things. Actually, what the Christian church does not teach is that all four of these things are already in the law of Moses. So where people get confused, I think, with this specific verse and this specific chapter is they see two sets of people. They see what the Christian church sees as Jews and then Gentiles. Well, the argument being that Gentiles don't have to follow the law of Moses, that it's only for Jews. I disagree, and there's a whole bunch in the Bible that you have to go back and look and study, remembering to keep in mind that the context of the culture and period are very important. However, we'll get back to what we're looking at here. So, like I said, these things are all for temple idol worship. That's all it is. That's all it is. Temple idol, where you cannot worship God and another God at the same time. You have to pick one or the other. Those things are first. Okay, the Gentiles who have turned to God have been saved. These are the four things they must give up immediately. They must give these up immediately, because you cannot serve God and a pagan deity at the same time. Now, the controversy comes in as to whether or not the law of God is done away with for Gentiles. This whole ordeal in chapter 15 come about from the circumcision party, who were a group of Jewish believers at the time who said that you must be circumcised and keep the whole law to be saved. Well, if you read through the Bible, it's evident that you are saved regardless of your state. When you come and you are saved, and you come to faith in Yeshua, then you are saved. You are saved at that point. However, if you read the rest of the Bible, the rest of the New Testament and all of the Old Testament makes it clear that you should follow the law of God, because, as John says, for the love of God is this, you keep His commandments. That's the love of God. If you say you love Him and you don't keep the commandments, then the truth is you're a liar and the truth is not in you. We can go through all that and point all those out. But after the four things the Gentiles here in chapter 15, after the four things the Gentiles are told they have to give up, immediately following is verse 21. For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. Modern Christianity will tell you that that verse doesn't matter, or they can't give an explanation for it being there, or if they do give an explanation, it's like one prominent preacher who put out an expositor's Bible says that James, the half-brother of Yeshua, Jesus, who grew up with him, knew him, was confused, on things like Paul giving sacrifice at the temple. This preacher also says that verse 21 here is just for, education purposes. After you're saved, you can go learn about the law of Moses if you want to at the synagogue and learn what it all meant. Well, my position is that verse 21 qualifies the rest of chapter 15. First, you give up your idol worship, you give up your pagan deities, and you are saved through Yeshua. Then you go and learn the law every week, because you can't just pick up and be perfect in the law of God. You can't just pick it up and go on knowing everything. You have to learn. Well, if the whole Old Testament glorified and raised up the law of God and said it was perfect, the light, the way, the truth, all these things, matter of fact, you can read Psalm 119 for that, and many, 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 many other places throughout the Old Testament. If it continues to call the law of God a blessing and the way we should live our lives, and in fact in Ecclesiastes says that's the whole duty of man is to keep the law of God, then where does the change come about? Why did it switch when it was not mentioned in the prophets anywhere? That just doesn't make sense to me. So keeping in context the rest of the Bible, and then you also have to realize that Paul's letters make up, if you're going to argue Paul without understanding the historical context, the context of his letters, or if you are unlearned and unstable, such as Peter says, you will misunderstand Paul and fall into the error of the lawless. Athesmos is the word in the Greek, I believe there, and it literally means lawless. It's not iniquity, such as the English word. The word is actually athesmos in Greek, and it's lawless. So if you misunderstand Paul and fall into the error of the lawless, you're going to throw out 95% of the Bible based on 5% of the Bible, which is Paul's letters. That's my thoughts on it. I think that verse 21 qualifies the rest of Acts chapter 15. Because listen, I understand Paul talking about Gentiles being grafted in and all that. The Gentiles have always been able to be grafted into Israel. From way back in Deuteronomy, when God says, there's one law for you and the alien and sojourner among you. There should be one law for the alien. For the native born and the alien, you are the same before me. So being grafted in has always been. And Yeshua, what Jesus did was take our sin from us. When we break the law, the curse that comes upon us for breaking the law, which is death, he took the curse out of the way. And he was able to reestablish us into covenant with the Father. The new covenant, where God does what? Jeremiah 31 through 33. He writes his laws on our hearts. He doesn't do away with the law. He writes it on our hearts for us to do it, to want to do it. Anyway, so keeping that in mind, verse 21 says to me, For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. So that's my viewpoint on it. I don't see, once you understand the culture and history, and you study the Old Testament, which, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, which is the Torah, and then the writings, which is the other books in the Old Testament, and then you have the prophets, which is the major and minor prophets, and then you have Psalms. Once you understand all those, and you have a base, a grounding in those, and then you read the New Testament, these things come alive. They come alive to you, and you will see where it all ties in, and it's not one God in the Old Testament and a new different God who changed in the New Testament. It's the same God with the same rules throughout all. Where we have gotten off track is in the centuries following the first century believers, we had anti-Semite Gentiles creeping into the church, which the Bible already warns it was happening, and they started doing acrobatics, theological backflips to get around the law of God, and it has turned into a lawless doctrine. Yes, salvation is through Jesus Christ. That is the only way to salvation. However, we come into a covenant. Well, that covenant has stipulations, like any covenant ever made has stipulations, and he is to be our God and love us and bless us, but our duty is to follow his commandments. That's the stipulations in the covenant. We are in a new covenant, but the terms are the same. That's as clear as I can make it. I hope y'all have some insight into this. Please comment. Even if you disagree, and that's fine. Listen, I'm not one to shy away from debate or differences of opinion. I used to be of the opinion of, the anti-law Christian doctrine of today. A little bit of Pentecostal, a little bit of Baptist, a little bit of several different denominations. But I've done study, and I've come to the conclusion that, a large portion of what Christians have been taught for a long time is not what's in the Bible. And I've had people raise the contention that, well, God wouldn't allow his doctrine to be wrong for so long. Well, for those of you who are not Catholic and are Protestant or an offshoot of the Protestant movement, you were held in darkness for 1,500 years. So let that sink in. Pentecostals, Baptists, all you who come from the Protestant movement, 1,500 years before the Reformation. However, this is going to be controversial, but I'm just going to lay it out there. You still follow some Catholic ritual as far as Sunday worship and other things, but that's a whole nother video. By no means am I saying I'm perfect. I have not got it all figured out. There's many, many things that I still really need to deeply study. These are just my thoughts, and I figured I'd cover this since it's an intriguing topic, and maybe spread a little bit of knowledge out there that people don't have, or a different way of looking at things. But I'm going to end that here. So, as always, I know you have other things to do, so get at it.